The morning sun hit Felicity Jensen's face like a slap of reality, reminding her that another day had come whether she wanted it or not, and she rose from her narrow bed in the small house on the edge of Parowan, Utah, knowing the flowers would not pick themselves. It had been 8 months since Thomas died, 8 months since the consumption took him slowly and painfully, leaving her alone at 24 years old with nothing but debts and a small garden she had started the previous spring. The garden had been Thomas's idea, actually, something to bring in extra money while he still worked at the general store, but now it was all she had. Every morning before dawn, she would walk through the rows of wildflowers she had cultivated, cutting the stems carefully and arranging them into simple bouquets that she would sell at the market in town. The year was 1882, and Parowan was a modest settlement in southern Utah, nestled in a valley surrounded by red rock formations and mountains that seemed to touch the endless blue sky. It was not a large town, maybe 800 souls on a good day, but it had a market square where farmers and craftspeople gathered twice a week to sell their goods. Felicity had claimed a small corner near the fountain, a spot that Thomas had helped her secure before he got too sick to leave the house. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill and stepped outside. The flowers were heavy with dew, their petals still closed against the night. She had planted mostly native varieties, Indian paintbrush and desert marigolds, along with some cultivated roses that required more care but fetched better prices. Her hands moved quickly through the stems, selecting the best blooms and cutting them cleanly. By the time the sun had fully risen, she had 3 baskets filled with arrangements, each one tied with a simple piece of twine. The walk into town took 20 minutes, and Felicity used the time to steel herself for the day ahead. The other vendors were kind enough, but she could feel their pity like a weight on her shoulders. Poor young widow, they would whisper, lost her husband so soon after the wedding. Only married 2 years, and now she has to scrape by selling flowers. She kept her chin up and her eyes forward, refusing to let their sympathy define her. The market was already bustling when she arrived. Old Mr. Peterson was setting up his vegetable stand, and the widow Martinez was arranging her preserves in neat rows. Felicity found her usual spot and began unpacking her flowers, arranging them in the 3 baskets so they looked as appealing as possible. The morning light made the petals glow, and she allowed herself a small moment of pride. They were beautiful flowers, and she had grown them herself. The first customers of the day were 2 older women who bought a small bouquet to take to the church. Then a young man purchased flowers for his sweetheart, blushing the entire time. By mid-morning, Felicity had sold nearly half her stock, and she began to relax. Maybe today would be a good day after all. That was when she noticed the cowboy. He was standing near the blacksmith stall, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright sky. He wore dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face, and there was something about the way he stood, perfectly still and observant, that made her notice him. He seemed to be watching the market, taking it all in with quiet attention. Felicity turned back to her flowers and tried not to stare. Cowboys came through Parowan regularly, passing through on their way to larger cities or following cattle drives across the territory. They rarely stayed long, and they certainly did not buy flowers. She was helping another customer when she felt someone approach her stand. She looked up to find the cowboy standing there, his hat now pushed back enough that she could see his face. He was young, probably around her age, with sun-weathered skin and startlingly blue eyes that crinkled at the corners as if he smiled often. There was a gentleness in his expression that surprised her. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice low and polite. Those are mighty fine flowers you have there." "Thank you," Felicity replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Are you looking for something particular?" He looked down at the baskets, studying the arrangements with genuine interest. Then he did something that completely surprised her. "I will take them all," he said. Felicity blinked. "I am sorry, what?" "All the flowers," he repeated, meeting her eyes. "Every last one. How much would that be?" She quickly calculated in her head, barely able to believe what she was hearing. "That would be $12, sir." $12 it is." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather pouch, counting out the coins carefully and placing them in her hand. His fingers were calloused and rough, the hands of someone who worked hard for a living. Felicity stood there, holding the money and trying to process what had just happened. "But sir, that is all my stock. What will you do with so many flowers?" The cowboy smiled then, a genuine warm smile that transformed his entire face. "Well, madam, I figure a town this pretty deserves to have flowers everywhere. Maybe I will give them to folks who look like they need cheering up. Maybe I will just enjoy them myself. But mostly," he paused, his blue eyes holding hers, "I wanted to make sure you did not have to worry about selling them all day." Felicity felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That is very kind, but you do not have to do that for me." "I know I do not have to," he said. "I want to. Besides, a man gets tired of looking at nothing but dust and cattle. These will be a nice change." He picked up 2 of the baskets easily, then looked back at her. "I am Bennett Caldwell, by the way. Most folks call me Ben." "Felicity Jensen," she heard herself say. "Felicity," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "That is a beautiful name. Suits you." She did not know what to say to that, so she just stood there holding the 3rd basket, feeling foolish and flustered and something else she could not quite name. Ben took the last basket from her hands, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Will you be here next market day?" he asked. "I come every Tuesday and Friday," she said. "Then I reckon I will see you Friday, Miss Felicity Jensen." He tipped his hat to her and walked away, carrying her 3 baskets of flowers like they weighed nothing at all. Felicity watched him go, her heart beating faster than it should. Around her, the other vendors were staring, and she could already hear the whispers starting. She ignored them and carefully tucked the money into her pocket. $12. That was more than she usually made in a week of market days. She should pack up and go home, but her legs felt unsteady, so she sat down on the low wall beside the fountain and tried to collect her thoughts. A cowboy had just bought all her flowers and asked her name. It was such a simple thing, really, but it felt significant in a way she could not explain. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. She walked home in the late morning sun, her baskets empty and her mind full of questions. Who was Bennett Caldwell? Was he just passing through town, or did he have business in Parowan? And why had he really bought all her flowers? That night, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about blue eyes and a gentle smile. She told herself she was being foolish. Thomas had only been gone 8 months. It was too soon to think about anyone else, even if the loneliness sometimes felt like it would swallow her whole. She had loved Thomas, had nursed him through his final months, had held his hand as the light faded from his eyes. How could she even consider looking at another man? But sleep was slow to come, and when it did, she dreamed of flowers and dust and a voice saying her name like it was something precious. Friday came faster than expected. Felicity found herself taking extra care with her appearance that morning, brushing her dark hair until it shone and pinning it up carefully. She wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Thomas had bought her for their first anniversary. Then she felt guilty for wearing it and almost changed, but the sun was already rising and she had flowers to cut. The garden yielded another good harvest. The late summer blooms were at their peak, full and fragrant in the morning air. She filled 4 baskets this time, telling herself it was just because the flowers were ready, not because she hoped to see a certain cowboy again. The market was crowded when she arrived. It seemed like half the town had turned out, and there was a festive atmosphere in the air. Someone mentioned that a cattle drive was passing near the valley, and several of the cowboys had come into town for supplies. Felicity felt her heart skip at the news. She set up her stand and had barely finished arranging the flowers when she saw him. Ben was walking through the market with another man, both of them leading horses. He spotted her, and his face lit up with recognition. He said something to his companion, who nodded and took both sets of reins, and then Ben was walking toward her stand with that easy, confident stride. "Miss Felicity," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "you are a sight for sore eyes." "Mr. Caldwell," she replied, trying to sound calm despite the fluttering in her chest. "I did not expect to see you again so soon." "I told you I would be here Friday," he said, looking genuinely surprised that she might doubt him. "A man keeps his word. Besides, I heard tell your flowers are the best in the territory." "I do not know about that," she said, but she was smiling now. He looked at her baskets, then back at her face. "I will take them all again," he said, "but on one condition." "What condition is that? You let me walk you home afterward. I want to see this garden of yours." "If I am going to keep buying out your stock, I should know where these beauties come from." Felicity hesitated. It was bold, perhaps too bold, but there was nothing improper in his manner. He was simply direct, honest in a way that she found refreshing. "All right," she said. "But only if you tell me the real reason you are buying all my flowers." Ben's smile softened. "That is a fair trade. Do we have a deal?" "We have a deal, Mr. Caldwell." "Ben," he corrected. "Please, just Ben." "Ben," she repeated and felt something warm settle in her chest. He paid her again, counting out the money carefully, and this time he took just 1 basket. "I will leave the others here for now," he said. "Do not want to carry them around town all morning, but I am claiming them, so do not go selling them to anyone else." "I would not dream of it," she said, and he laughed. A sound like summer thunder, warm and rolling. Ben went back to his business, and Felicity tried to focus on the few customers who came by despite her sold-out stock. Several people asked if she was taking orders for the next market day, and she found herself agreeing, pulling out a small notebook to write down their requests. It was more business than she had ever had, and she suspected word was spreading about the cowboy who bought all the widow's flowers. The morning stretched into afternoon, and the market began to thin out. Felicity watched as Ben moved through the crowd, stopping to talk with various merchants, clearly conducting business of some kind. He seemed to know several people in town, greeting them warmly and shaking hands. Whatever he was doing here, it was not just passing through. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Ben returned to her stand. "Ready?" he asked. Felicity nodded and began packing up her empty baskets. Ben took 3 of them without being asked, leaving her with just 1 to carry. They walked side by side through the thinning market, and Felicity was acutely aware of the eyes following them. Let them talk, she thought. She was a grown woman, and she could walk with whomever she pleased. "You said you would tell me the real reason," she reminded him once they were on the road leading out of town. Ben was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the path ahead. "The first day I saw you," he said finally, "I was standing by the blacksmith watching the market. I had just arrived in town and was getting my bearings, and I saw you there with your flowers, looking so dignified and alone. There was something about the way you held yourself, like you were made of steel wrapped in silk. And I thought, that is a woman who has known sorrow but has not let it break her." Felicity felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. You could see all that from across the market. I have always been good at reading people, Ben said. Comes with the work. But yes, I could see it. And then when I got closer and saw your flowers, saw the care you had put into each arrangement, I knew I was right. You are someone who creates beauty even when life has been hard. That is rare, Felicity. That is worth supporting. So it was charity, she said, trying not to feel disappointed. No, Ben said firmly, stopping in the road to look at her. It was not charity. Charity would be giving you money and pitying you. This was trade, fair and square. You have something valuable and I paid for it. The fact that I wanted to help you, that I wanted to see you smile, that does not make it charity. It makes it something else entirely. What does it make it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I am still figuring that out, he admitted. But I would like to keep seeing you if you are willing. I would like to know you better. I think there is something here worth exploring. Felicity looked into his blue eyes and saw only honesty. No games, no hidden motives, just a straightforward man saying straightforward things. It should have frightened her, this intensity, this directness. Instead, it felt like coming up for air after being underwater too long. I would like that too, she said. They started walking again, and the tension that had built between them eased into something comfortable. Ben asked about her garden, and Felicity found herself talking more freely than she had in months. She told him about starting the garden with Thomas, about how it had become her lifeline after his death, about the satisfaction of nurturing something from seed to bloom. Thomas was your husband, Ben said. It was not a question but a gentle acknowledgement. Yes, he died of consumption 8 months ago. We were married for 2 years. I am sorry, that must have been hard. It was, Felicity said simply. It still is some days. But life continues whether we are ready or not. That it does, Ben agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I lost someone too, not a wife but my brother. We were working a cattle drive 3 years ago and there was a stampede. He got trampled trying to save another man, died instantly. I am so sorry, Ben. Thank you. I tell you not to compare our sorrows, but so you know I understand something of what you are carrying. Grief is grief, and it changes you. They reached the small house on the edge of town, and Felicity led him around back to where the garden lay. In the afternoon light, it was beautiful, row upon row of colorful blooms swaying gently in the breeze. Ben set down the baskets and walked slowly through the rows, examining the plants with genuine interest. This is remarkable, he said. You did all this yourself. Thomas helped me prepare the beds, but yes, mostly it is my work. I like it. It feels honest, growing things. Ben turned to her, his expression serious. Felicity, I need to be honest with you about something. I am not just passing through Parowan. I have been hired to oversee the establishment of a new ranch about 10 miles north of here. The owner is an investor from back east who wants to get into the cattle business. I have been working for him for the past 6 months, getting everything set up. The house is almost finished, and we will start bringing in cattle within the month. So you will be staying in the area, Felicity said, her heart lifting. Yes, for the foreseeable future this is home. That is why I felt I could speak to you the way I have. I am not looking for something temporary, Felicity. I am too old for games and life is too short. I saw you and I felt something, and I wanted you to know it. Felicity looked at this man, this honest, straightforward cowboy who had bought all her flowers and asked her name and made a decision. Would you like to stay for supper? She asked. It will not be anything fancy, but I have stew left over from yesterday. Ben's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. I would like that very much. They went inside, and Felicity busied herself reheating the stew while Ben sat at the small kitchen table and continued their conversation. He told her about growing up in Texas, about learning the cattle trade from his father, about the brother he had lost and the restless years that followed. He spoke of the new ranch with genuine excitement, describing his plans for building up the herd and establishing good relationships with the neighboring ranchers. The owner, Mr. Harrison, he is mostly interested in the financial side, Ben explained. He trusts me to run the day-to-day operations. It is more responsibility than I have ever had, but I am ready for it. I am tired of drifting. I want to build something lasting. I understand that, Felicity said, ladling stew into bowls. That is what the garden is for me. Something permanent, something that is mine. They ate together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The conversation flowed easily, moving from topic to topic without awkwardness. Felicity found herself laughing at Ben's stories about life on the trail, and he listened with rapt attention when she talked about the different varieties of flowers and their care. When the meal was finished, Ben helped her clean up despite her protests. "My mother raised me right," he said. "A man helps with the work, especially when he has been fed. Your mother sounds like a wise woman." She was. Passed when I was 17, but I still hear her voice in my head sometimes, telling me to mind my manners and treat people right. He dried the last plate and set it carefully on the shelf. "I should go. It is getting dark and you probably have an early morning." They walked to the front door, and Ben retrieved his hat from where he had hung it on the peg. He stood there for a moment, seeming to search for words. Finally, he said, "May I call on you again? Properly, I mean, not just at the market." "I would like that," Felicity said. "Sunday afternoon, I could come by after church if you attend." "I do. The service ends at noon. Then I will be here at 1 if that suits you." "That suits me fine, Ben." He reached out and gently took her hand, raising it briefly to his lips in an old-fashioned gesture that made her heart flutter. "Until Sunday, Felicity. Until Sunday." She watched from the doorway as he mounted his horse and rode off into the gathering dusk. Only when he had disappeared from sight did she close the door and lean back against it, her hand still tingling from his touch. The next 2 days passed in a strange state of anticipation. Felicity worked in her garden, prepared for the next market day, and tried not to think about Sunday too much. But Ben's words kept echoing in her mind. "I am not looking for something temporary. I saw you and I felt something." She felt it too, this pull toward him, and it frightened her with its intensity. How could she feel so drawn to someone she barely knew? Was she betraying Thomas's memory by opening her heart so soon? But when she thought about Thomas, really thought about him, she remembered how he had always wanted her to be happy. The last thing he said to her, with his final breath, was, "Live, Felicity. Promise me you will live." She had promised, even as her heart was breaking. And maybe living meant allowing herself to feel again, to hope again, to take a chance on something new. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Felicity went to church as usual, sitting in her customary pew near the back. Reverend Thompson gave a sermon about faith and new beginnings, and she wondered if it was a sign. After the service, several women stopped her to chat, and she knew they were curious about the cowboy who had been seen walking her home. She kept her answers polite and vague, unwilling to share something she was still trying to understand herself. She walked home quickly and changed into her second-best dress, a soft green that Thomas had always said brought out the color of her eyes. Then she prepared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and preserved fruit, arranging everything on the table with hands that trembled slightly. At precisely 1 in the afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Felicity took a deep breath, smoothed her skirt, and went to answer it. Ben stood on her doorstep, hat in hand, looking freshly scrubbed and nervous. He wore clean trousers and a pressed shirt, and his hair was still damp from washing. In his other hand he held a small bundle. "Afternoon, Felicity," he he said. "I brought you something." He held out the bundle and she took it carefully. When she unwrapped the cloth, she found a small leather journal and a fountain pen. "I noticed you were taking orders in that old notebook," he explained. "Thought you might like something sturdier for your business." Felicity felt tears spring to her eyes. It was such a thoughtful gift, practical and kind. "Ben, this is too much." "No, it is not," he said gently. "You are building something, Felicity. You should have the right tools." She invited him in, and they sat at the kitchen table, eating lunch and talking as if they had known each other for years rather than days. Ben told her more about the ranch, about the house that was almost complete, and the plans for the spring cattle drive. Felicity shared her own dreams of expanding the garden, maybe even selling to merchants in larger towns. "You could do it," Ben said with conviction. "Your flowers are as good as any I have seen, better than most. With the right contacts, you could build a real business." "It is just a dream," Felicity said, but there was longing in her voice. "Dreams are where everything starts," Ben replied. "My brother used to say that. He was the dreamer and I was the practical one. But after he died, I realized he was right. If you do not dream, you do not grow." After lunch, they walked through the garden together. Ben asked questions about different plants, genuinely interested in learning about her work. Felicity found herself explaining the intricacies of cultivation, the challenges of growing flowers in the Utah desert, the satisfaction of seeing something bloom that you had nurtured from a seed. "It is like ranching in a way," Ben observed. "Taking something small and helping it become what it is meant to be. There is honor in that kind of work." They ended up sitting on the small bench Thomas had built beside the garden, watching the afternoon light slant across the flowers. Ben sat at a respectful distance, not crowding her, but she was aware of every inch between them. "Can I ask you something?" Ben said after a while. "Of course." "Do you feel guilty about this, about us talking like this?" Felicity was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Thomas has not been gone long, and there are people who would say this is too soon. But then I remember that life is short and uncertain. Thomas knew that better than anyone at the end, and I think he would want me to be happy." "My brother would tell me I am a fool if I let you slip away," Ben said. "He always said I thought too much and felt too little. But with you, Felicity, I do not have to think. I just feel, and it feels right." She turned to look at him, this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly and turned everything sideways. "It feels right to me too," she whispered. Ben reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, and Felicity felt warmth spread through her entire body. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands in the afternoon sun, not needing words. When the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Ben reluctantly stood. "I should go, but may I come again?" "Next Sunday." "You do not have to wait until Sunday," Felicity heard herself say. "You could come by during the week if you like. I am here most evenings." Ben's smile was brilliant. "Then I will come Tuesday after your market day. We can celebrate a good day of sales." "Even if it is not a good day. Especially if it is not a good day. Everyone needs company when things are hard." He kissed her hand again, a gesture she was beginning to cherish, and rode off into the evening. Felicity stood watching until he disappeared, then went inside and sat at her kitchen table, staring at the new journal he had brought her. She opened it to the first page and wrote the date. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she wrote, "Today I think I began to understand what it means to live again." The next weeks fell into a pattern that felt both strange and natural. Ben came by twice a week, sometimes more if his work at the ranch allowed. He would arrive in the evening, often bringing small gifts, fresh meat from a hunt, a book he thought she might enjoy, wildflowers he had found on the range. They would share supper, talk for hours, and gradually, Felicity felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. At the market, Ben continued to buy her flowers, though now he only bought half her stock, allowing her to sell the rest to other customers. Word spread about her quality, and her business grew. She began taking orders from the hotel and the restaurant, providing arrangements for their dining rooms. The money was better than she had dared hope, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt financially secure. But it was not the financial security that made her happy. It was the way Ben looked at her when he thought she was not watching. It was the sound of his laugh and the gentle strength of his hands. It was the way he listened to her, really listened, as if her words were the most important thing in the world. One evening in late September, Ben arrived looking more excited than usual. "The house is finished," he announced. "And Mr. Harrison is coming next week to see the progress. I was hoping you might come see it too. I want your opinion on something." "My opinion on what?" Felicity asked, intrigued. "You will see. Can you come Friday afternoon? I will send a wagon for you." She agreed, curious and a little nervous. Friday came with cooler weather, a hint of the coming autumn in the air. True to his word, Ben sent a wagon driven by a ranch hand named Charlie, a grizzled older man who tipped his hat politely and helped her up onto the seat. The ride to the ranch took about 40 minutes, following a road that wound through red rock formations and scattered juniper trees. As they crested a final rise, Felicity caught her breath. The ranch spread out below them in a broad valley, with a substantial house standing proudly at its center. It was a beautiful property, the house built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. Ben was waiting on that porch, and he came down the steps as the wagon pulled up. "Welcome to the Caldwell Ranch," he said, helping her down. "Caldwell Ranch. I thought it belonged to Mr. Harrison." "It does, but he insisted I name it, said a ranch needs a good name and Caldwell has a nice ring to it." Ben looked almost bashful. "Come on, let me show you around." He led her through the house, which was spacious and well built, with large windows that let in plenty of light. The furniture was minimal but sturdy, and there was a sense of potential about the place, as if it were waiting to become a home. "It is beautiful, Ben," Felicity said honestly. "You must be proud." "I am, but here is the thing I wanted your opinion on." He led her to a room on the south side of the house, currently empty except for a few stacked crates. "This room gets excellent light all day long. I was thinking it would make a perfect workroom for someone who grows flowers. Plenty of space for starting seeds, arranging bouquets, that sort of thing." Felicity stared at him, her heart beginning to pound. "Ben, what are you saying?" He took her hands in his blue eyes serious and tender. "Felicity, I know it has not been long. I know people will talk and maybe they have a right to. But I also know that I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you create beauty in the world. I love the way you talk about your flowers and the way you listen when I talk about the ranch. I love everything about you, and I do not want to waste time pretending I do not." Tears were streaming down Felicity's cheeks now. "Ben, let me finish," he said gently. "I am asking you to marry me, Felicity. I am asking you to build this life with me, to make this house a home, to grow your flowers and grow old together. I know I cannot replace Thomas, and I would never try. But I can love you with everything I have, and I can promise you that I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Will you marry me?" Felicity looked at this good, honest man who had bought all her flowers and asked her name, who had seen her sorrow and not been frightened by it, who offered her not charity but partnership. She thought of Thomas and the promise she had made to live. She thought of the garden and this beautiful room full of light. She thought of her own heart, which had been so damaged but was somehow beating strong and sure now. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Ben, I will marry you." He let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until they were both laughing and dizzy. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with such tenderness that she felt her breath catch. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Please," she whispered. He kissed her softly, reverently, and Felicity felt something inside her break open, all the grief and loneliness flooding out to make room for this new, bright feeling. Love. She was falling in love again, and it was terrifying and wonderful and exactly right. They stood there in the sunlit room for a long time, holding each other and making quiet plans. Ben wanted to marry soon, before winter set in. Felicity agreed, seeing no reason to wait when they were both sure. They would tell people in town next week, let the gossips have their say, and then move forward with their lives. "I want you to keep your garden," Ben said. "The house in town, keep it as your workroom if you like, or sell it if you prefer. But the flowers, that is yours, Felicity. I am not asking you to give up anything. I just want to add to what you already have." "I want to sell the house," Felicity said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "It has too many sad memories. I will keep the garden for now, hire someone to help maintain it. But I want to start fresh here with you. I want to look forward, not back." Ben smiled and kissed her again. "Then that is what we will do." The news of their engagement caused exactly the stir they expected. At the next market day, Felicity wore the simple gold band Ben had given her, and the whispers started immediately. The widow Martinez was disapproving, muttering about unseemly haste. Mr. Peterson was more pragmatic, congratulating her and saying that life was for the living. Reverend Thompson, when she went to see him about performing the ceremony, was kind and understanding. "I see the way he looks at you, Felicity," the Reverend said. "That is a man in love, and you deserve happiness. Thomas would want this for you." "Thank you, Reverend. That means a great deal." They set the wedding for the 3rd week of October, giving them time to make arrangements, but not so long that the mountain passes might be snowed in. It would be a small ceremony at the church, followed by a simple reception at the ranch. Ben insisted on inviting the ranch hands and several business contacts from town. Felicity invited the few friends she had maintained and was touched when most of them accepted. The weeks before the wedding were a flurry of activity. Felicity sold her house to a young couple who were expecting their first child, and she felt a sense of relief as she signed the papers. She hired a local boy to maintain the flower garden through the winter, paying him a fair wage and teaching him what he needed to know. She packed her few possessions and said goodbye to the little house that had sheltered her through the worst time of her life. Ben was busy at the ranch, preparing for Mr. Harrison's visit and overseeing the arrival of the first cattle. But he made time to see her every day, even if only for a few minutes. He brought her a beautiful chestnut mare as an early wedding gift, saying she would need her own horse at the ranch. Felicity named her Rosie and learned to ride properly, cantering through the desert landscape with a sense of freedom she had not felt in years. The day before the wedding, Mr. Harrison arrived. He was a portly man in his 50s, dressed in expensive Eastern clothes that looked out of place against the rough landscape. Ben brought him to meet Felicity, and she was nervous about making a good impression. "So you are the flower lady my foreman has been mooning over," Harrison said, but his eyes were kind. "He tells me you are a businesswoman in your own right." "I try to be, sir," Felicity said. "Good, good. A ranch needs a strong woman. My own wife runs half my operations back in Boston, though she would deny it if asked." He leaned closer conspiratorially. "Between you and me, Mrs. Jensen, Ben is the best man I have ever hired. You have chosen well, and so has he. I wish you both every happiness." The wedding day dawned cool and clear, perfect October weather. Felicity woke in her nearly empty house for the last time and took extra care with her appearance. She wore a new dress, pale blue silk that Ben had insisted on buying despite her protests. The widow Martinez, softened perhaps by romance or by Felicity's obvious happiness, came to help her arrange her hair. "You look beautiful, child," the older woman said, her voice gruff with emotion. "That cowboy is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Felicity said. The church was full when she arrived. It seemed like half the town had turned out, curious and celebratory in equal measure. But Felicity only had eyes for Ben, who stood at the altar looking nervous and proud in a new suit. When she walked down the aisle alone, carrying a bouquet of her own flowers, his face transformed with love. The ceremony was short and sweet. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Ben kissed her tenderly, and the church erupted in applause. The reception at the ranch was a joyful affair. The ranch hands had set up tables in the yard, and there was more food than seemed possible. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon there was dancing. Felicity found herself whirled from partner to partner, laughing and breathless, until Ben cut in and claimed her for himself. "Happy, Mrs. Caldwell," he murmured as they swayed together. "Happier than I thought possible," she replied honestly. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Ben and Felicity stood on the porch of their house, watching the last wagons roll away. The ranch hands had tactfully made themselves scarce, camping out in the bunkhouse and giving the newlyweds privacy. Ben led Felicity inside, through the house she was still learning to call home, to the bedroom they would now share. He was gentle and patient, and if Felicity cried a little, it was from joy and release and the overwhelming rightness of it all. They loved each other slowly in the darkness, learning the language of each other's bodies, and afterward lay wrapped together, listening to the wind whisper across the valley. "Tell me something," Felicity said sleepily. "That first day at the market, did you really just happen to be standing by the blacksmith, or were you watching for me?" She felt Ben's chest rumble with quiet laughter. "Old Charlie told me about the pretty widow who sold the best flowers in town. I may have positioned myself where I could get a good look." "You liar," she said, but she was smiling. "You said it was chance." "I said I saw you. I never said it was an accident." He kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made buying those flowers. Best decision I ever made selling them to you." They fell asleep tangled together, and Felicity's last thought before dreams claimed her was that she had kept her promise to Thomas. She was living fully and completely, and it was beautiful. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Felicity had lived alone for so long that sharing space with another person felt strange at first. But Ben was patient and considerate, and gradually they found their rhythm. She rose early to work in her sunlit room, starting seeds and planning for the spring planting. Ben managed the ranch, overseeing the hands and caring for the growing herd. In the evenings, they came together, sharing meals and conversation and the quiet comfort of companionship. Winter arrived, blanketing the valley in snow and forcing them indoors for long stretches. Felicity found she did not mind. She used the time to expand her business plans, writing to merchants in Salt Lake City, and even as far as San Francisco, sending samples of her dried flower arrangements. To her delight, several responded with orders. Ben built her proper drying racks and shelving, turning the sunny room into a real workshop. "You are going to be too successful for me," he teased one evening, watching her carefully pack an order. "I will just be Mr. Felicity Caldwell, the flower lady's husband." "Never," she said, kissing him. "You will always be the man who bought all my flowers." Spring brought its own changes. Felicity hired 2 local women to help her expand the garden, teaching them her methods and paying them fair wages. The flower business grew beyond her wildest dreams, with regular orders coming from 3 different cities. Ben's ranch prospered as well, the cattle thriving in the good grazing land. In May, Felicity realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just stress from the busy season, but when it happened a second time, she allowed herself to hope. She waited until she was sure before telling Ben, nervous about his reaction. She chose a Sunday afternoon when the work was light. They were sitting on the porch, enjoying the warm weather when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Ben," she said softly, "we are going to have a baby." His blue eyes went wide with shock, then filled with tears. "Truly, truly. I think around December, maybe January." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are having a baby." The pregnancy was easier than Felicity had feared, but harder than she had hoped. The morning sickness lasted well into the 4th month, and there were days when she could barely keep food down. But Ben was attentive and worried, bringing her ginger tea and sitting with her when she felt poorly. The ranch hands were excited about the prospect of a baby on the property, and several of them had wives who came by with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. As her belly grew, Felicity had to curtail some of her work in the garden. She hired another helper and began training them to take over more of the physical labor. It was hard to let go of control, but Ben reminded her that she had built something strong enough to sustain itself. "You created this business, Felicity. Now trust it to grow without you doing everything yourself." In December, when the snow lay heavy on the ground and the mountain passes were closed, Felicity went into labor. Ben sent for the midwife, Mrs. Chen, who lived on a neighboring ranch. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Ben paced in the other room, driving the ranch hands crazy with his worry. Finally, in the early afternoon of a cold December day, a baby's cry split the air. Mrs. Chen opened the door, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Caldwell, a healthy, loud son." Ben rushed into the room to find Felicity exhausted but radiant, cradling a red-faced, squalling infant. "A boy," she said wonderingly. "We have a son." They named him Thomas Bennett Caldwell, honoring both the man who had been Felicity's first love and the man who was her second. Little Tommy, as they immediately began calling him, had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. He was a demanding baby, crying lustily when he wanted something and sleeping peacefully when content. Those first months were exhausting. Felicity was overwhelmed by the needs of an infant, and there were moments when she sat in the rocking chair at 3 in the morning, Tommy screaming in her arms, and wondered if she was doing anything right. But Ben was there, taking his turns walking the floor with the baby, changing diapers without complaint, and reminding her that they were in this together. "You are a wonderful mother," he told her one particularly difficult night. "Tommy is lucky to have you, we both are." As winter gave way to spring, life settled into a new normal. Tommy began sleeping longer stretches, and Felicity found she could return to her work part-time, with Mrs. Chen coming by several days a week to help with the baby. The flower business continued to thrive, and Ben's ranch was turning a good profit. They were building something lasting, just as they had both wanted. One evening in late spring, after Tommy had been put to bed, Ben and Felicity sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "You ever think about that first day?" Ben asked. "When I walked up to your stand and bought all your flowers?" "All the time," Felicity admitted. "I thought you were crazy. I was crazy, crazy in love from the first moment I saw you." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I knew then that you were going to change my life. I just did not know how much. You changed mine too. You gave me a reason to believe in happiness again. You and Tommy, you are my whole world now." "Not your whole world," Ben corrected gently. "Your flowers are part of it too, and your friends and all the things that make you who you are. That is what I love about you, Felicity. You are complete on your own, and you let me be part of that completeness." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside, Tommy made a small noise in his sleep but did not wake. The ranch was quiet, peaceful home. "I want more of this," Felicity said suddenly. "More children, more years, more of building this life with you. I want it all, Ben." He smiled and pulled her close. "Then that is what we will have, all of it. Every day, every challenge, every joy together." The years that followed were full and rich. Tommy grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's easy laugh and his mother's determination. When he was 2, Felicity became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter, Caroline, was born on a warm summer evening, arriving quickly and with far less drama than her brother. She had dark hair like her mother and a calm temperament that balanced Tommy's boisterous energy. The flower business continued to expand. Felicity hired a manager to handle the day-to-day operations, freeing her to focus on design and new product development. She began experimenting with flower essences and pot pourers, creating products that sold well in the fancy stores back east. The workroom Ben had built for her became too small, and they added on, creating a proper workshop with storage space and room for multiple helpers. Ben's ranch grew as well. Mr. Harrison was so pleased with the profits that he gave Ben a percentage stake in the operation, making him a part owner rather than just a foreman. With that security, Ben expanded the herd and began breeding horses as well as cattle. The Caldwell Ranch became known throughout Utah as a place of quality and fairness, where the hands were treated well and the livestock was cared for properly. Through it all, Ben and Felicity's love deepened. They learned to navigate disagreements with respect and patience. They supported each other's dreams and ambitions. They made time for each other even when the demands of children and business pressed in. Every year on the anniversary of the day they met, Ben bought flowers from Felicity's garden, recreating that first moment when he had purchased all her stock and asked her name. When Tommy was 6 and Caroline was 4, Felicity became pregnant for the 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder than the others, leaving her tired and sick. At 32, she felt every year of her age, but Ben was there, caring for her and the children, hiring extra help around the house and making sure she rested. Their second daughter, Grace, was born in the spring of 1891, 9 years after Ben had first walked up to Felicity's flower stand. She was a tiny, delicate baby, and the birth was difficult enough that the midwife warned there should not be more children. But Grace was healthy and thrived, and Felicity felt their family was complete. Tommy showed an early aptitude for ranching, following his father around and pestering the hands with questions. Caroline was quieter, showing an interest in her mother's flowers and spending hours in the garden, learning the names of plants. Little Grace was still too young to show her inclinations, but she was a happy child who laughed easily and loved everyone. One evening, when Grace was about 6 months old, Felicity and Ben sat on their porch as they so often did. The children were asleep inside, Caroline having been convinced to stop reading and go to bed. Tommy sprawled across his quilt with the abandon of the truly exhausted, and Grace sleeping in her cradle near their bedroom. You ever regret it? Felicity asked. Buying all those flowers that day. You could have had a simpler life. Ben looked at her as if she had lost her mind. Regret loving you, regret this family, this life. Felicity, you are my everything. Those were the best $12 I ever spent. She laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. And you asking my name. That was the moment everything changed. What would you have done if I had just bought the flowers and walked away? If I had not asked? Felicity considered that. I think I would have always wondered. There was something about you even then. A feeling that you were important somehow. Fate, Ben said. Charlie told me about the widow with the flowers, and I thought I would just take a look. But the moment I saw you, I knew. I have never believed in love at first sight before that day, but there it was. I did not believe in second chances, Felicity said softly. I thought my time for happiness had passed with Thomas. But you showed me that hearts can heal, that love can come again. You gave me that gift, Ben. You and this life we have built. They sat watching the stars wheel overhead, content in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. The flower business would continue to grow. The ranch would prosper. The children would grow and have children of their own someday. But this moment of peace and love and togetherness, this was what mattered most. As the years continued to pass, the children grew and changed. Tommy became a skilled horseman and cattleman, learning everything his father could teach him. At 15, he was already talking about the future of the ranch, full of ideas for expansion and improvement. Ben listened to him with pride, knowing his son would someday run the operation. Caroline discovered she had a talent for the business side of her mother's flower enterprise. At 13, she was already helping with the books and coming up with marketing ideas that impressed even Felicity. She had a shrewd mind for numbers and a creative eye for design, a combination that served the business well. Grace, at 7 years old, was the family's sunshine. She loved both flowers and horses, unable to choose between her parents' occupations. She would spend mornings in the garden with Felicity and afternoons riding with Ben, happy and energetic in a way that brought joy to everyone around her. Felicity was now 38, and Ben was 39. They had been married for 15 years, and their love had only grown stronger. The ranch was thriving. The flower business was successful beyond their initial dreams, and their children were healthy and happy. It was more than Felicity had ever dared hope for in those dark days after Thomas's death. One afternoon, while sorting through old papers in the house, Felicity came across the journal Ben had given her so many years ago. She opened it to that first entry, written the day after he had first visited her garden. Today, I think I began to understand what it means to live again. She sat down and read through the entries, a chronicle of their courtship and early marriage, the births of their children, the challenges and triumphs of building a life together. The later pages were blank, waiting to be filled. On impulse, she picked up a pen and began to write. 15 years have passed since the day a cowboy bought all my flowers and asked my name. 15 years of love and laughter, hard work and harder lessons, joy that fills my heart to bursting. If I could go back to that grieving young widow in the market square and tell her what was coming, I do not know if she would believe me. But I would tell her to have courage to take the chance, to say yes when the cowboy with the kind eyes asks her name. I would tell her that life is long and full of surprises, that hearts can heal and love can bloom again. I would tell her that the best is yet to come. Ben found her there, tears running down her cheeks as she wrote. "What is this?" he asked gently, sitting beside her. She showed him the journal, and he read the latest entry, his own eyes growing wet. "You have always had a way with words," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I learned from you," she replied. "You taught me to be honest, to speak from the heart. That first day when you told me why you bought my flowers, you were so direct and real. It gave me permission to be the same." "We have built a good life, have we not?" Ben said, looking around the comfortable home they had created together. "The best life," Felicity agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." That evening, they gathered the children together for a family meeting. Tommy came in from the stables, Caroline from her makeshift office in the workshop, and Grace from wherever she had been playing in the garden. They sat around the large kitchen table that had hosted so many meals and conversations. "Your father and I wanted to talk to you about the future," Felicity began. "You are all growing up so fast, and we want you to understand what we are building here." Ben took over. "This ranch, your mother's business, they are not just ours. They are for all of us, for this family. Tommy, when you are ready, the ranch will be yours to run. Caroline, the flower business is already half yours in spirit. And Grace, whatever path you choose, there will be a place for you here. But more important than the businesses," Felicity continued, "is what they represent. They represent hard work and perseverance. They represent taking something small and nurturing it until it grows. Your father bought all my flowers and asked my name 15 years ago, and from that simple beginning all of this has come." "Is that the story you always tell about how you met?" Tommy asked, grinning. He had heard the tale many times. "It is the true story," Ben said. "Sometimes the most important moments in life look simple on the surface. A man buys flowers. A woman smiles. But underneath, everything is changing." They talked long into the evening, the children asking questions about the early days, about their parents' dreams and plans. By the time they went to bed, there was a new understanding among them all, a sense of being part of something larger than themselves. The next morning, Felicity woke early and walked out to the original flower garden she still maintained near the house. It was smaller now than the commercial field she had established, but it was special to her. This was where it had all started, the seedlings she and Thomas had planted, and she had nurtured alone after his death. She knelt in the dirt and examined the plants, noting what needed tending. Her hands moved with the sureness of long practice, pulling weeds and pinching back dead blooms. The work was meditative, grounding her in the present moment. "Thought I might find you here," Ben's voice came from behind her. She looked up to see him standing at the garden gate, coffee mug in hand. "I was just thinking about Thomas," she admitted, wondering what he would make of all this. Ben came and sat beside her on the ground, heedless of the dirt. "I think he would be proud of you, proud of how you survived, how you built this business, how you are raising these children." "I hope so." "I loved him, Ben. I want you to know that. I loved him deeply." "I know you did. And I love that about you, your capacity to love fully. You did not hold back with me because you had loved him. You gave me your whole heart." "You gave me yours too," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "You saved me, Ben, not from poverty or hardship, but from loneliness, from forgetting how to live." They sat together in the garden as the sun rose higher, warming the earth and coaxing the flowers open. It was a moment of pure peace, a pause in the busy flow of their lives. "I want to plant something new," Felicity said suddenly. "Something we choose together, something that represents our family." "What did you have in mind?" "Apple trees. Along that fence line there. Apples take years to mature, but they last for generations. I like the symbolism of that. We plant them now and our grandchildren will eat the fruit." Ben smiled. "I like that. Let us do it. We will plant the trees this fall, a whole row of them." And so they did. When autumn came, they ordered saplings from a nursery in Salt Lake City and spent a weekend planting them with the children's help. Tommy dug the holes, Caroline measured the spacing, and Grace carried buckets of water. Ben and Felicity worked side by side, settling each young tree into the earth and packing soil around its roots. "These will outlive us," Ben said as they planted the last tree. "Good," Felicity replied. "Let them be a reminder that we were here, that we loved each other and built something lasting." The trees were bare sticks that first winter, seemingly lifeless against the snow. But spring brought the first buds, and everyone celebrated as if it were a great achievement. Grace checked on the trees every day, reporting on their progress with the seriousness of a scientist. Life continued its forward march. Tommy grew tall and broad-shouldered, more and more capable of handling ranch responsibilities. At 17, he met a girl named Sarah at a dance in town, and Ben and Felicity watched with amusement and a touch of wistfulness as young love bloomed. Caroline finished her schooling and asked if she could take over full management of the flower business when she turned 18, a request Felicity granted with pride and relief. Grace remained the family's joy, bridging the worlds of flowers and cattle with equal enthusiasm. Mr. Harrison visited less frequently as he aged, but when he came, he was always pleased with what he found. "You have turned this into something remarkable, Ben," he said during a visit when Tommy was 19. "And I see your son is ready to take on more responsibility." "Time moves on, does it not?" "It does," Ben agreed. "But some things endure." Harrison pulled Ben aside later that day. "I want to sell you the rest of the ranch," he said bluntly. "You have been more than a manager, you have been a true partner. My health is not what it was, and I want to settle my affairs. What say you? Can you buy me out?" Ben was stunned. "Sir, I do not know if I have that kind of capital available." "We will work out terms," Harrison said. "Fair terms that account for all you have put into this place. Talk it over with that remarkable wife of yours and let me know." That evening, Ben and Felicity stayed up late, going over finances and possibilities. The flower business was profitable enough that they could leverage it for a loan. Tommy's involvement meant they had a succession plan. It was risky, but it was also an opportunity too good to pass up. "What do you think?" Ben asked. "I think you should do it," Felicity said firmly. "This has been your dream, Ben. Full ownership, building something that is completely ours to pass to our children. We can make it work." So Ben negotiated with Harrison, and after several weeks of back and forth, they reached an agreement. Ben would buy the ranch over a period of 10 years, with terms that were generous but fair. On a cold December day, just after Grace's 11th birthday, the papers were signed. The Caldwell Ranch was now truly the Caldwell Ranch in every sense. They celebrated that Christmas with more joy than usual, knowing they had reached a major milestone. The apple trees, now 5 years old, were still years away from bearing fruit, but they had grown sturdy and strong, their branches reaching toward the sky. "To the future," Ben said, raising a glass at Christmas dinner. The whole family gathered around the table. "To the future," they all echoed. The future arrived faster than expected. Tommy married Sarah the following summer in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Parowan. She was a sweet girl with a good head on her shoulders, and she fit into the family as if she had always been there. Within a year, she gave birth to Ben and Felicity's first grandchild, a boy they named Benjamin Thomas, called Benji to avoid confusion. Holding her grandson for the first time, Felicity felt the circle of life complete itself. She was 44 now, silver threading through her dark hair, her hands marked by years of working in soil and arranging flowers. But she felt young in her heart, filled with gratitude for every blessing. "He looks like you," she told Ben, who was hovering nearby with the anxious pride of a new grandfather. "He looks like his father, who looks like me," Ben corrected, but he was grinning. "We make pretty babies, the Caldwell men." Caroline, now 21, showed no interest in marriage, much to the dismay of several young men in town. She was too busy expanding the flower business, negotiating contracts with stores in Denver and San Francisco. Felicity watched her daughter with pride, seeing the businesswoman she herself might have become if circumstances had been different. Grace, at 14, was caught between childhood and womanhood, all gangly limbs and passionate opinions. She declared she would never marry, then changed her mind and decided she would marry a cowboy poet who could appreciate both her loves. Ben and Felicity tried not to laugh at her dramatics, remembering their own youth. The years continued their steady progression. More grandchildren arrived as Tommy and Sarah had 2 more children, a daughter and another son. The apple trees finally bore fruit, small and tart but incredibly sweet, and Felicity cried the first time she bit into one, thinking of the day they had planted them together. Ben turned 50, then Felicity. They marked each birthday with quiet celebration, grateful for every year they had been given. The ranch prospered under Tommy's increasingly confident management. The flower business continued to expand under Caroline's leadership. And Grace finally decided on her path, choosing to study horticulture at a university back east, determined to bring new techniques and knowledge back to the family business. One evening, as they approached their 30th anniversary, Ben and Felicity took their customary seats on the porch. 30 years since he had bought all her flowers. 30 years of marriage, love, struggle, and triumph. "You remember what you asked me that first day you came to the house," Felicity said. "You asked if you could see the garden where the flowers came from." "I remember. I wanted to understand you better, wanted to see what you had created. You have seen me create so much more since then. A business, a family, a life, all of it with you." Ben took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "We created it together, Felicity, every bit of it. I may have been the one who bought your flowers and asked your name, but you were the one who answered. You took the risk, said yes to possibility. That took courage. It took love," she corrected. "Or maybe the hope of love. I saw something in you that day, something honest and true. And I wanted it, even though I was frightened." "Are you still frightened?" he asked, teasing gently. "No. Now I am just grateful. Grateful for every day, every moment, every memory. You gave me a second chance at happiness, Ben. You gave me this beautiful life." He leaned over and kissed her, a kiss that held 30 years of love and partnership, of shared joys and weathered sorrows, of building something lasting. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you, Felicity Caldwell." "I love you too, Bennett Caldwell. Always and forever." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, painting the vast Utah sky with light. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing, Sarah calling them to wash up for supper. The ranch was quiet, the cattle settled for the night, the horses resting in their stalls. In the garden, Felicity's flowers slept, waiting for the morning sun. Everything they had built, everything they had fought for, everything they had dreamed, it was all here in this moment. A cowboy had bought all her flowers and asked her name, and from that simple beginning, an entire world had grown. The years that followed their 30th anniversary were slower, gentler. Ben and Felicity gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of their respective businesses, trusting in the capable hands of their children. Tommy ran the ranch with confidence and innovation, introducing new breeding techniques and expanding into new markets. Caroline had turned the flower business into a regional powerhouse, with operations in 4 states and contracts with major hotels and restaurants. And Grace, having completed her studies, returned to integrate modern horticultural practices with her mother's traditional knowledge, creating hybrid varieties that were both beautiful and hardy. More grandchildren arrived, 7 in total, filling the ranch house with laughter and chaos during family gatherings. Ben built a larger table to accommodate everyone, and Sunday dinners became a sacred tradition, 3 generations gathering to share food and stories. Felicity was 60 now, and Ben was 61. They moved a bit slower, their joints complaining about the cold and their energy not quite what it had been. But they were healthy and content, blessed with the kind of old age that comes from a life well lived. On a warm summer evening, as they approached what would have been their 44th anniversary, Ben suggested they take a ride out to the far pasture. "Just like old times," he said, "when it was just us and the land." Felicity agreed, and they saddled 2 horses, her Rosie now retired and replaced by a gentle mare named Daisy. They rode slowly through the ranch land, taking in the familiar landscape that had been their home for so long. When they reached the far pasture, with its view of the entire valley spread below, they dismounted and sat on a fallen log, watching the sun begin its descent. "I have been thinking," Ben said, "about legacy and what we leave behind." "That is heavy thinking for such a beautiful evening," Felicity teased gently. "Maybe, but hear me out. We have the ranch and the flower business. We have our children and grandchildren. Those are the obvious legacies. But I think the real legacy is something else." "What is that?" "Love," Ben said simply. "We have shown our family what real love looks like. Not the easy kind that exists when everything is perfect, but the kind that endures through hardship and change and loss. The kind that chooses to keep showing up, day after day, year after year. That is what I am most proud of, Felicity. That is what I hope they remember." Felicity felt tears gather in her eyes. "That is beautiful, Ben. And true. We did not have an easy beginning, either of us. We both knew loss before we found each other. But we chose to love anyway, to build anyway, to hope anyway. And it was worth it," Ben said. "Every challenge, every struggle, every moment of doubt, all worth it for this, for what we have now." They sat in silence for a while, watching the colors shift across the sky. Then Felicity spoke again. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not bought those flowers, if you had just walked past my stand that day?" "Never," Ben said firmly. "Because it never would have happened that way. I saw you and I knew. Some things are just meant to be, Felicity. You were meant to be mine and I was meant to be yours. The flowers were just the excuse to start the conversation." She laughed at that, the sound carrying across the empty pasture. "So you are saying you would have found another way?" "Absolutely. I would have bought your baskets. I would have offered to carry them home for you. I would have tripped and fallen at your feet if that is what it took. One way or another we were going to happen." "I like that," Felicity said. "The inevitability of us." They rode back to the ranch house as the stars began to emerge. When they arrived, they found the family gathered on the porch, Tommy and Sarah, Caroline with her latest beau, Grace with her husband, and all the grandchildren running around the yard. "We thought you might like some company," Tommy said. "Mama made her famous pie." "All of the pies," Sarah corrected. "One of each kind because we could not decide." They gathered around the big table, 3 generations of Caldwells, and shared pie and stories and laughter. Little Benji, now a young man of 18 himself, asked his grandparents to tell the story of how they met, and Ben and Felicity obliged, tag-teaming the tale as they had done so many times before. "Your grandmother was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen," Ben said. "Your grandfather was covered in trail dust and smelled like horse," Felicity added, making the children giggle. "I bought all her flowers, spent $12 whole on them, and I asked her name. Felicity, I told him. Felicity Jensen." "Now Felicity Caldwell," Ben finished, reaching for her hand across the table. The children clapped as if it were the first time they had heard the story, and Felicity felt her heart swell with love for all of them. This family they had created, this legacy of love and hard work and perseverance. That night, lying in bed with Ben's arms around her, Felicity thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. From a grieving widow selling flowers at a market to the matriarch of a thriving family business empire. From a lonely cowboy to a ranch owner and grandfather. They had built something beautiful together, something that would outlast them both. "I would do it all again," she whispered into the darkness. "Every moment, every choice. It all led here, and here is exactly where I want to be." "Me too," Ben murmured, already half asleep. "Best $12 I ever spent." She smiled and closed her eyes, drifting off to the sound of his steady breathing and the distant call of an owl in the night. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Summer gave way to fall, fall to winter, winter to spring. Ben and Felicity grew older, their hair completely silver now, their movements slower but no less purposeful. They celebrated their 50th anniversary with a party that brought people from all over the territory, friends and business associates and family members they rarely saw. At the celebration, held in the newly expanded barn, Felicity stood to give a speech. She was 70 now, but her voice was still strong and clear. "50 years ago, a cowboy walked up to my flower stand and bought every single bloom I had. Then he asked my name. It was such a simple thing, really. Buy flowers, ask a name. But from that moment, my entire life changed. Ben gave me hope when I thought I had none left. He gave me love when I thought my chance for it had passed. He gave me partnership and respect and laughter and joy. And together, we built this." She gestured around the barn, indicating not just the structure but everything it represented. "This family, these businesses, this life, it is our legacy, and I could not be more proud." Ben stood and kissed her to thunderous applause. "What she said," he joked. "But seriously, Felicity is the strongest person I know. She took tragedy and turned it into beauty. She took a small garden and turned it into an empire. She took a chance on a dusty cowboy and turned him into the luckiest man alive. I love you, Felicity Caldwell, more today than I did 50 years ago, and that is saying something." The party continued into the night with dancing and food and stories. The grandchildren performed a play they had written about how their grandparents met, complete with cardboard flowers and a paper mache market stall. It was both ridiculous and touching, and Felicity laughed until she cried. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Ben and Felicity found themselves alone on the porch once more, their favorite spot in all the world. 50 years, Felicity marveled. "Where did the time go?" "Into living," Ben replied. "Into every day and every moment." "We did not waste it, Felicity. We lived every bit of it." "We did," she agreed, "and I would not change a thing." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the stars. Inside the house, they could hear their family cleaning up, their voices a comforting backdrop to the quiet night. This was peace, Felicity thought. This was what it meant to have lived a good life. The years that remained to them were precious. They moved even more slowly now, their bodies showing the inevitable wear of long lives. But their minds remained sharp, and their love remained constant. They spent their days in simple pleasures, sitting in the garden, playing with their great-grandchildren, sharing meals with their family. Ben was the first to fall ill. A persistent cough that would not go away, a tiredness that sleep did not cure. The doctor diagnosed a weak heart, worn out from a lifetime of hard work. He prescribed rest and medication, but both Ben and Felicity knew what it meant. The end was coming, as it came for everyone eventually. Ben faced it with the same direct honesty he had brought to everything in life. "I am not afraid," he told Felicity one evening as they sat together in their bedroom. I've lived a full life, loved a good woman, raised fine children. I am ready. I am not ready to lose you, Felicity said, her voice breaking. I know, but you are strong, Felicity. You survived loss before, and you will survive this. And you will not be alone. You have a family that loves you, a business that thrives, a legacy that will endure. I am not leaving you with nothing, my love. I am leaving you with everything. He declined rapidly after that. Within a month, he was bedridden, his breath coming short and labored. The family gathered, Tommy and Sarah, Caroline and her husband, Grace and her family. The grandchildren came, some with children of their own now. They took turns sitting with him, holding his hand, telling him they loved him. On a cool spring morning, with Felicity beside him holding his hand, Bennett Caldwell took his last breath. He was 76 years old, and he died as he had lived, with dignity and grace. Felicity sat with his body for a long time after, just holding his hand and remembering. She thought of that first day at the market, the way he had looked at her flowers with such appreciation. She thought of his proposal in the sunny room of the ranch house. She thought of 54 years of marriage, of building a life together, of love that had sustained them through every challenge. Thank you, she whispered to him. Thank you for buying my flowers. Thank you for asking my name. Thank you for every day, every moment, every year. Thank you for loving me. The funeral was huge, the church packed with people whose lives Ben had touched. Ranchers and business associates, ranch hands past and present, neighbors and friends. They told stories of his fairness, his honesty, his generosity. They spoke of a man who kept his word and treated everyone with respect. Felicity listened to it all with pride and pain intertwined. They buried him in a plot on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple stone that read, Bennett Caldwell, 1843–1919. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. He built with love. After the funeral, Felicity returned to the ranch and tried to figure out how to live in a world without Ben. It was harder than she had expected, even though she had survived Thomas's death all those years ago. But she had been young then, with her whole life ahead of her. Now she was 75, and the idea of years stretching out without Ben felt impossible. Her family rallied around her. Tommy and Sarah moved into the main house to keep her company. Caroline visited daily, bringing work and gossip and love. Grace came with her grandchildren, filling the house with noise and life. They refused to let her sink into grief, pulling her back to the world with gentle insistence. Slowly, Felicity found her way forward. She spent hours in the garden, her hands in the soil, tending the flowers that had started everything. She wrote in her journal, filling pages with memories of Ben and their life together. She sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the land they had built, feeling his presence in every familiar view. One afternoon, about 6 months after Ben's death, Felicity was in the garden when little Benji came to find her. He was married now, with a baby daughter of his own. "Grandma," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear. How did you do it? How did you survive losing Grandpa? You loved him so much." Felicity considered the question carefully. "I did love him, more than I can say, but Ben gave me something important in our years together. He taught me that love does not end with death. It continues, in memories and in the lives we touched. I carry him with me every day in the way I tend these flowers, in the values I taught your father, in the stories I tell you children. He is gone, but what we built together remains. That is how I survive, Benji, by honoring what we had and continuing what we started." The young man nodded, thinking. "Thank you, Grandma, that helps." After he left, Felicity sat on the bench by the garden, the same bench Ben had built so many years ago. She thought about her answer and realized it was true. Ben was gone, but their love remained, woven into every aspect of her life and the lives of everyone they had touched. Felicity lived another 4 years after Ben's death. They were quiet years, spent with her family and her flowers, watching great-grandchildren grow, and the businesses she and Ben had built continue to thrive. She saw Tommy's youngest son take an interest in ranching, ensuring another generation would carry on the work. She saw Caroline's daughter show an aptitude for the flower business, promising continuity there as well. On a warm summer evening, just after her 79th birthday, Felicity sat on the porch and felt a deep weariness settle over her. She had lived a long life, a full life, a life rich with love and work and family. She was ready to rest. That night she went to bed and did not wake up. She died peacefully in her sleep, her heart simply deciding it had beaten enough. They found her in the morning, a small smile on her face as if she had seen something wonderful in her final moments. They buried her beside Ben on the hill, her stone reading. Felicity Jensen Caldwell, 1858–1937. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she grew beauty from sorrow. At the funeral, Tommy stood to give the eulogy. "My mother was the strongest person I ever knew," he said. "She survived losing her first husband, built a business from nothing, raised 3 children, and loved my father with a devotion that inspired everyone who saw it. She taught us that hard work and hope can overcome anything. She showed us that love is worth the risk, worth the pain, worth everything. And she left us a legacy that will continue for generations." He told the story then, the story that had become family legend. Of a young widow selling flowers at a market, of a cowboy who bought them all and asked her name, of how that simple interaction had led to everything that came after: a marriage, a family, businesses that employed dozens, a love that had sustained them through 54 years together. "They built this," Tommy said, gesturing broadly to encompass not just the ranch but the entire legacy. "From $12 and some flowers, they built an empire of love, and we are all here because of that, because a cowboy was brave enough to buy all the flowers and ask a name, because a widow was brave enough to answer." The family gathered back at the ranch after the funeral, filling the house with memories and stories. They looked through old photographs, finding pictures of Ben and Felicity through the years. Young and newly married, with their first baby middle-aged and proud, elderly and content. In every picture, their love was evident in the way they looked at each other, the way they stood close, the way they smiled. In the garden, the flowers bloomed as they always had, generation after generation of blossoms emerging from the soil Felicity had first tended so long ago. The apple trees Ben and Felicity had planted stood tall and strong, laden with fruit, exactly the legacy they had hoped to create. And on the porch, someone had left a small bouquet of wildflowers, the same kind Felicity had sold at the market all those years ago. No one knew who had put them there, but everyone understood what they meant. A tribute to where it all began, to the moment when a cowboy bought all the flowers and asked a name, and 2 lives became one. The Caldwell Ranch continued to prosper for generations, the flower business alongside it, both flourishing under the careful stewardship of Ben and Felicity's descendants. And every year, on the anniversary of that first meeting at the market, the family would gather and tell the story again, keeping alive the memory of love that had started it all. Because in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the businesses or the property or the money, but the proof that love endures, that chances are worth taking, that beauty can grow from sorrow, and that sometimes all it takes is $12, some flowers, and the courage to ask a name.